Story 1. The Disappearance of Julia Benson. In early October 1998, 22-year-old Julia Benson disappeared from her small coastal town in Maine. A college student studying psychology, she worked part-time at a local cafe and lived an unremarkable life. She wasn't the type to draw attention to herself, but she was loved by those around her for her kindness and outgoing nature. No one could have guessed that one day she would vanish, leaving behind a mystery that would linger in the town for years. Julia worked at a small cafe, where local students and workers often gathered. She was just like any other young woman, working hard during the day and meeting friends in the evening to chat and share stories. She was well liked by the townspeople, known for her friendliness and warmth. On October 2nd, 1998, a Friday, Julia went to work at the cafe as usual. It was a regular day, and she didn't seem worried or upset about anything. After finishing her shift around 8:30 p.m., she called her friend Taylor and said she was heading home. That was the last call she made. When Julia didn't return home, Taylor started calling her cell phone, but it was off. Initially, Taylor thought Julia might have stayed with a friend or gone on a late-night walk as she sometimes did. But when the morning came and Julia still hadn't returned, Taylor began to worry. Julia's parents called all the places they could think of: friends, work, the cafe where she worked. At the cafe, they learned that Julia had left around 8:30 p.m., just as she told Taylor, and had headed in the direction of home. The police began investigating, but all they could determine was that she had left the cafe and was walking home. The police immediately started searching, but something felt off about her disappearance. Julia was well known in town, and no one thought she would be the victim of a crime. Volunteers, her friends, and family joined the search. They searched the woods, the lakes, and local streets, but Julia was nowhere to be found. The only lead was surveillance footage from outside the cafe, showing Julia calmly walking down the street toward her home. But this was just an empty clue. The police slowly narrowed their list of suspects but couldn't find any solid evidence. Days later, Julia's body was discovered. It was found along a wooded road, about 10 miles from town. The body had been concealed by branches and leaves as if someone had tried to hide it. The coroner confirmed she had been murdered, though the cause of death remained unclear, possibly strangulation or a blow to the head. What was strange was that there were no visible signs of struggle. The police found that in the days leading up to her disappearance, Julia had been messaging a man she had met online. This man, Thomas Wayne, was an old friend of her ex-boyfriend. When asked if he knew Julia, her friend said he was a regular acquaintance with whom she had recently been talking. But his alibi for the night of her disappearance didn't check out. Thomas claimed that he had never seen Julia that evening and had nothing to do with her disappearance. But many people in town started to suspect him. However, they could never prove his guilt. The investigation dragged on for months, but the case remained unsolved. The town continued with life, but the shadow of Julia's tragic death hung over it. In the years that followed, other young women in the area also disappeared, but the mysteries surrounding those cases remained unsolved, leading many to believe that something darker lurked in the town. Story 2. The Sinister Traces of Karen James. Karen James was a 34-year-old woman, a mother of 2 children and a successful businesswoman. In 2014, she decided to take a short vacation to escape the stress of work and family life. Her husband stayed home with the kids, and Karen decided to rent a secluded cabin in the Colorado mountains for some peace and solitude. Karen had always enjoyed spending time alone, away from the noise of the city. She thought a few days in the mountains would help her recharge and find inspiration for her work. She rented a cabin deep in the woods, several hours from her home. It was a quiet place with hardly any visitors, and she preferred this isolation over crowded resorts. But when several days passed and Karen still hadn't returned, her husband began to worry. First, he thought she was just staying a few extra days on her own or taking her time to relax. But when her phone went unanswered, he called the police. The search for her began. The police tracked her route and found her car parked on a remote road leading to the mountain range. The car was empty, and there were several footprints around it, leading into the forest. Everything pointed to the fact that Karen had left her car and ventured deeper into the woods. The police, along with volunteers, began a massive search. But what they discovered 13 days later shocked everyone. Karen's body was found in a hidden cave, concealed from view. An autopsy revealed that she had been brutally beaten, with clear signs of torture. Strangely, there were no signs of a struggle at the scene, suggesting that she had been attacked in a planned and deliberate manner. The police began to question people who might have been connected to Karen. They soon discovered that Karen had recently been in contact with a man named Daniel Crow, who had just been released from prison for violent crimes. He had recently been seen in a local bar. He denied his involvement, but the investigation revealed that his alibi didn't check out. Despite these suspicions, the case remained unsolved. The search for new evidence continued for years, but the murderer was never found. Karen James became another victim of a case that would forever remain a mystery. Story 3: The Vanishing of Tanya Miller. Tanya Miller was a 19-year-old student known in her small town for her outgoing nature and friendly personality. In the summer of 2012, she decided to spend an evening with her friend at a local bar. Little did she know, that night would mark her last moments. Tanya met up with her friend and they decided to have a fun night at a popular bar in town, frequented by students. They chatted with various people, and soon Tanya noticed a man she had never seen before. He approached her and they began talking. The conversation lasted for some time, and Tanya seemed to be enjoying herself. She never suspected that this man could be dangerous. The next morning, Tanya hadn't returned home, and her family started to panic. At first, they thought she might have stayed with a friend or simply decided to stay out a little longer. But when Tanya's phone went unanswered, they contacted the police. The search began. The police traced her movements and soon discovered that her car had been found near the bar. But Tanya was nowhere to be found. There was nothing unusual in her belongings, and it seemed as though she had disappeared into thin air. The investigation revealed that Tanya had been talking to the man at the bar that night, but after that, no one knew where she had gone. Days later, Tanya's body was discovered in an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. An autopsy revealed that she had died from head trauma. There were no signs of a struggle at the scene, which led investigators to believe she had been attacked while unsuspecting. The police began to suspect the man Tanya had been speaking to that night. Soon, they learned that he had recently been released from prison for violent offenses. However, he denied any involvement in Tanya's disappearance, and his alibi didn't hold up. Tanya Miller became another victim of an unsolved crime. The small town was filled with fear and suspicion, and residents were left wondering who would be next.